Peter Markey and his wife Beryl, who is a potter, have lived and worked here in Powys for the past 7 years. As well as enjoying living in this beautiful place, Peter uses the landscape as inspiration for his paintings. Inside the house there is a rich collection of finished work, ideas in progress and new themes for development. Peter has his workshop right down in the basement.
I would love to be a magician and just have square bits of wood which somehow when people look at them they could appear in their mind's eye as whatever I wanted them to look like. But wherever I live, I can go to the nearest timber merchant and just go and just buy things. I buy 2 by 1, 1 by 1, 1.5 by 1, 2 by 2, all the kind of things, and I make my models fit those things. I don't alter the wood, the models are going to fit the size. I love just using the local do-it-yourself shop and you know, just simplest tools, and if I've I need some type of solution to a problem. I know I can buy certain cogs or certain things. I can't be bothered because I don't know where they are and so on. So I ignore it, and I just try and find a solution myself. And if you're making mechanical things, weight is quite a consideration, and the heavier it is, the less efficient it is, because it's got all the strains of its own weight. So if you can use the lightest, that's why when you make, I work out my models first of all by using paper and cardboard. They work really much better because they're so light. The whole set of cams are pushing up and down these dowels, which are in fact the teats underneath the other. These are little shapes of buckets where the milk is supposed to be squirting into. Well, and this handle turns around, and the cams move around, and each dowel moves up and down at different times, and so on. That's very simple. If you look at this motion here, this rod here, it moves backwards and forwards across the cow, which is what you would expect if you have a handle and a crank going in that direction. So what I had to do is put this little device here so that this connecting rod would move this, swivel it backwards and forwards, and attached to this swiveling machine is this arm sticking out like that, which in fact translates one direction to another direction, which is quite clever. And I get really pleased when I work out a little solution like that. At the start of the movement, I had to put it right up there to get it close to the pivoting point, so that the actual head would then move. And then I wanted the tail to move as well, so then I just had to connect that with that, so that as the head moves, so does the tail, and so then we get that. And some people can actually think it out in their head. Some people actually need to draw it out on a two-dimensional paper, and they can work it out like that. I've got to actually make one little bit and make it work. And then when I've seen that, and my mind then can actually, by looking at the three-dimensional object, and finished though it is, I can then try, somehow my mind will can actually anticipate or find out what the next move is. But I've got to make it. I've got to do it bit by bit like that. And when I look at other automata and other people who make machines, I look at the model, but I deliberately try to ignore how they're made, because I really don't want to be influenced by anybody else, because it really is quite exciting, because I worked until 3 o'clock to try and work out how I was going to translate the kind of this movement to that movement. Once again, the same as wood, I just use what's available. So the glues that you find in Woolworths or any do-it-yourself department I use. So so it could be Unibond or any Evo-Stick, any glue which dries reasonably quickly. I hate having to wait too long. I don't use clamps or a vise to hold two pieces of wood together while they dry. What I do is I use contact glue. So for example, when I stick this piece of wood onto that horizontal piece of wood there, I just put contact glue, Evo-Stick, on the two surfaces, that inside of that surface and inside of that surface, and as soon as they dry, I then stick them together, and then I put them in the vise and just give them one kind of squeeze, and then I put a dowel through. I put contact glue on that surface and that surface, inside surfaces, and that surface and that inside surface, and then when they dried, I just put them together and squeeze them, and then I put dowels in and dowels in there, but I left the dowels sticking out, and they marked where they came out and drilled holes in this, and then I pressed that this way with ordinary non-contact glue. If I make anything, whether it's a cow or human being or not, I like the method of construction to stay, so and get mixed up, so that you can't. For example, here we've got 8 maids of milking, and they've got slits cut in them because they've got to guide the hands, which go up and down. The hands that go up and down like that mustn't turn around. They've got to be facing this way. Therefore, there's got to be some way of controlling that. So they've got little dowels. The edge of the cow or whatever it is has got to fit in with the mechanism or the piece of wood. When I was young, when all the kind of travelling was done done horse and cart, brought milk and coal and vegetables, and the bag of bone meal came all with horse and cart. So they were all so wheels going around. We had a little open casement clock, and you could see all the little pendulum and all the cogs going around. Going to a railway station was always absolutely a very exciting thing, because all the great wheels and the connecting rods were exposed, and you could actually see how it worked, and it was a personification of marvellous Victorian engineering. Which engines in for getting air and extracting water in pits. And almost every steelworks had a huge beam engine, and watch huge cranes lifting loads, and you could see winches being used, and all the way along the harbour wall there were little capstan lathes which had ropes around pulling ships in. So it was a part of everybody's life then, because everything was accessible. You could all the steelworks and all the factories were open. We experienced these things, and all of a sudden everything all factories suddenly became inaccessible, and docks became accessible. There were gates and there were guards, and you could have passes. And so all of a sudden, nobody knows how other people work.
So how are people now, how are younger people going to see some of these mechanisms, see them?
Well, I don't know, because I expect there are mechanisms. Lots of people have bicycles again now, and bicycles are a superb piece of mechanism in which you have the crank, which are the pedals, and they attach to a chain, and so on. And there are brakes, which everybody who has a bike learns to adjust the brakes and learns the little mechanism of the bicycle. But it's getting less and less easy to actually to see engines and motors actually working with
Are we going to have to look to museums then?
Well,
to provide this stimulus?
I think that what's nice is museums in fact have acted quite quickly to this lack of kind of experience, and so they're now actually reintroducing the Victorian experience into museums, and also trying to put on display as many mechanical devices as possible.
Where can people see toys and modern mechanisms, moving mechanisms?
Well, more and more now. Spooner and myself began in Falmouth, and just by accident, and a craft shop called Cabaret Mechanical Theatre, and this moved to London, and now it's in Covent Garden, and that is an absolutely magnificent kind of place where you have the best examples of all contemporary museum. Is a museum which is somehow tells you the whole history of automata, starting with a few little moving models from Egypt in about 3,000 years old, right up to
actually there are some of those in the British Museum too, some very early.
That's right. Toys. Yes.
Who among the modern makers, inspires you? Who interests you?
Well, there are two people. Paul Spooner is the Leonardo da Vinci of modern automata. There are lots of clever automata makers, but I think Paul Spooner somehow combines all the best qualities. The man I really like most of all is a person called Tim Hunking, and I like his because nearly all his models are very, very minimal. A piece I think in York Museum, and it is too used, and he did his faces very, very simple. Sometimes he makes a model of a face and head and shoulders just with newspaper, papier-mâché. These two have just two circles for their mouths, and these circles just move around and around, and it just looks as if they're chewing, and they just look like you. And it's amazing how those two little circles moving around and around give this marvellous impression of chewing. They don't look at all like chewing, but somehow the symbol is absolutely right, and nobody can mistake them, and that's all they do.
You're still making moving mechanisms, but you're painting. You trained as a painter, you started off as a painter, and in between you're still painting.
Yes.
How are you developing? Where are you going next? What's happening?
Well, first of all, when I was young, I always made things, and right from my father had a shed with lots of tools, so I was always making things, and I always drew and always painted. which all children do, but I just carried on, and perhaps that meant that I never grew up properly, but I just always need to draw, and I always need to make pictures and make things. As regards making pictures, I just think it's a kind of form of security in a way, that if I don't, I feel irritable and not as happy as I would be when I do make things. And I almost think it's almost like, for example, a bird which has to kind of make lots and lots of tunes to define its territory, and so not just enjoyment, but it's defining where it is and telling everybody else where they are. Things are, we need to communicate. We are natural makers of things, and we're natural inventors, and there's all that inside us, and it's got to come out, and mine comes out in making images in paint and making these little toys.
Yes.
Where do ideas come from? Well, your ideas come when you're working. If you are working, just ideas flow. You can't help it, because your subconscious mind somehow works out what the next step's going to be, and all of a sudden you're halfway through something. A very clear idea of what is needed. Person rowing, you've got to think now, when the person rows, exactly what happens? The person's body pivots backwards and forwards, and the hands are catching the oars, and the oars are also pivoting, and you've got to actually have a clear idea, and to get a clear idea you've got to externalize the idea, and you've got to actually put it down. I was on a train going to York a few weeks ago, and I wanted to work out a very simple wave machine with a rower, and I've made quite complicated ones, but I wanted one which was going to be very, very simple, just going to be just a very linear, kind of almost two-dimensional object. Eventually I thought that I would eliminate the two waves that went in front and just have one wave, and so that the boat and the waves would be one piece of wood, and they would swivel backwards and forwards, and also the actual rower would swivel backwards and forwards, and it would be very, very simple. The piece of wood and the boat are one, and this figure just swivels backwards and forwards. The oars are pivoted at a point attached to the arms, and it just goes like that, and it's just a matter of finding the right measurements, and then I just try little pieces of paper, and if I find this crank, if I do it too long, it won't work, so I actually just cut it down, pin it in another position, and using this method of having a piece of polystyrene or cardboard and just guessing, you've got to start with something. At first I would just start with the figure and the boat and the oars without connecting it to the little crank at the bottom here, and see how that worked. And when I've worked that out, I can then work out the exact measurements and know it's going to work in wood, and then put it into a more three-dimensional kind of arrangement. Ideas come through the process of working. As you work, ideas come. Milkmaid person, I made this particular shape like that because I would just cut that piece of wood out. I'm always trying to eliminate.
So in fact, you cut out that milkmaid and you used her then as a template?
I used it as a template to cut for the wood, so that would be exact. In fact, I eventually cut out all the shapes out eventually on another piece of paper. I put a thin bit of paper over tracing paper and drew them and cut them all the shapes out, and then I drew them on the appropriate piece of wood and cut them out, and so there they appeared like that. I had 8 pieces of hardboard, and then I sellotaped them together, so I cut them all. When I cut the top one out, and therefore I cut 8 out, yes, at the same time. paint in some way or other. It just transforms something. It's marvellous how easy and quick it is. But a lot of work has got to be done before this happens, because this hen, for example, had to have 2 coats of white, sandpaper of emulsion white, and then the colours kind of look nice and bright on top of the white. And then the colours put on and so on. And it's got to be sandpapered and smoothed off before you paint. So there's a lot of hard work has been done before that. I enjoy most of all is trying to actually work out kind of methods of trying to imitate or suggest water and movement of sea and so on. This is because I regard myself as the kind of king of wave machines and so on, because I'm the only person who does lots and lots and lots of wave machines. It's also because it's such a crazy idea to try and represent something as fluid and as insubstantial as water using rigid pieces of wood. It is one of the first wave machines I made. I made 4 of them, and the only mechanism I knew was car mechanisms. I knew about cranks and cams. The rowers are just swiveling on one point and being pulled by a crank which is attached by a connecting rod. So it's very, very simple. I'm so pleased that I could make a very simple mechanism that I decided to paint all the mechanisms very bright, like a fairground. I wanted everything to look like a fairground, and the mechanisms and the workings became more important than the image that they were moving. But I wanted the whole thing to be a kaleidoscope of colour. A cylinder which has got a wheel attached to it, and that's the only mechanism that goes around. So these then rest against that one, and just with the weight of them and the friction makes them turn around. And if I put them all like that, then, and then I put the little ship in the middle. Suppose one of them doesn't go around that one there. If I turn it this way, they all go around except that one. If I turn it the other way, they all go around except the top one. So you're always missing out with one wave because of somehow with the way it works. The thing I do besides doing waves, I actually try and design as many kissing machines as possible, different types of mechanisms to represent kissing, and I don't know anybody else who does that as well. So I regard myself as a wave and kissing machine man.